All right, welcome to the part of this video series that you've all been waiting for, which is how the room sounds and how the room measures. All I can say is this is going to be an ongoing process. This is definitely going to be part one of this specific theme. But let's dive in because quite a few things have materialized in my search for a good sounding room. Hi, I'm Thorne. Welcome to the channel. If you've not seen the rest of this series, I've got a link in the description below to all the other videos in this series documenting the behind the scenes of me attempting to turn my spare room in my flat in London into a professional mixing and mastering studio. The question is, can it be done and how well can it be done? And in this video, we're going to be exploring some of the compromises and some of the solutions that are coming up regarding doing this. I'm going to show you measurements with the first reflection points, measurements with various different treatment in different positions, how it all measures and what we're going to be looking for in terms of optimizing the room and how we're going to do that. We're obviously going to be looking into frequency response, decay times, which is arguably even more important, and the compromise between the two. So regarding acoustic treatment, obviously no speaker in any room is flat unless the room measures flat, which no room ever does. That's almost impossible to achieve scientifically. So it's about finding a compromise. It is also about finding the right speaker for the room. Stay tuned because there'll be more videos on that coming. But it is about finding the right treatment and putting it in the right place. Just a reminder, I'm trying to do this on a budget and I'm trying to do this with minimal impact on this room. So if this doesn't work or if I need to move out or something, I can strip it all away and there's minimal damage or changes to the room so I can leave it in the state that it was when I moved in or before. So with the acoustic treatment, I basically found it all on Reverb. I found two lots from two different studios with quite a variety of different products. And I've got some bass traps, I've got some wall panels, I've got some corner traps, I've got a couple of ceiling panels, and I've got some thin kind of 1-inch panels as well, from my old studio and some of the stuff I found secondhand. So the idea being to do it as cheaply as possible and basically use what I need. And this didn't quite go as I thought it would. I've ended up putting things in different positions than I anticipated. But let's dive into ruse and see what has occurred. All the measurements you're going to see are at 1/6 smoothing, which is how I prefer to see these charts. You get enough detail without getting really bogged down in minute chops in the frequency. So here we have the room after I'd put in the window plug, which is now behind me. More on that in a minute. And this is how the room measured with the speakers in the corner, one speaker in the corner of the room if you look back at video 2. There's a bit going on, but there's a big build up in the low mids. Moving to the speakers with the window plug, you can see the frequency response is quite a bit flatter. Now I was measuring this at 86.2 decibels, and with the window plug you can see the first problem. There's a massive null at 94.5 hertz of 14 decibels, which is obviously not acceptable. Trinov can do something with that, but that's a stretch too far in my opinion, even for Trinov. So what can acoustic treatment do to help this? This next reading is with the first reflection points. So this was with two panels either side of the speakers on the side walls, a ceiling cloud, and the two bass traps at the back of the room. What do we see? Well, the null is better. We're down to basically a 10 dB null, so that's an improvement. We've got this huge peak coming at 127. Now that number is quite key for reasons we'll get onto later. And there's another peak a bit further up, 428, and there's this weird thing going on in the top end where there's loads of build-up. At this point, there wasn't much surface area of the room covered, so there was a lot of flutter decay. Then I brought in all the panels that I had, and this was the result. Let's go back to 86. Now the null is a little bit worse, but there's also this big drop between 60 and 80 hertz. So there's a huge dip in the low end. There's definitely some cancellation going on at about 94, which is a problem. But the rest of it, give or take, is a little bit better. The peak at 127 is down, but peaks aren't an issue. Remember, we can reduce the amplitude with DSP of those frequencies so they don't build up so much in the room. But with this one at 127, I do think there's something more sinister going on, which we'll get into later in the video. So then I tried various different combinations of soffit placement, no soffits, half the amount of corner traps. I've got 2 on each side behind the speakers, and then these 2 I tried in all sorts of different variations. Then with no corner traps, then first reflection points plus some treatment down the sides. Then I tried some diffusers. Now I have some GIK 60 by 60 by 10 centimeter panels with scatter plates on, and I tried these in various positions, and although this looks a bit better, there was always a problem in the mid-range where they seem to amplify some frequencies or cause some cancellation. At no point in the room I had them on the sides, I had them in the window, had them at the back. I tried loads of different variations. At no point did they really do anything beneficial. They just caused another type of problem. So I'm not using those for now. Then I put the bass traps on the sides against in the first reflection points, and this is where the null started getting a little bit interesting, because this was the most mitigated at this point. But then there's a huge peak again at 127 and this weird build up in the top end. This reading here is an average of a whole bunch of different positions I had when I'd settled on the bass traps on the side and everything else pretty much in place as you see it. I did an average 10 centimeters above, 10 centimeters below the listening position, 10 centimeters forward, 10 centimeters back, and then took an average in this is what we got. So across the board, relatively flat, except the 2 obvious problems. So at this point, even at the null at say minus 10, minus 11 dB, which is about as good as I could get it with the window plug, that to me was still a big problem. And I could hear it, and I wasn't happy with it. I then thought, well, what I need to do is take the window plug out, because in theory, that frequency at 95 Hertz, a lot of it will go out of the window, and therefore less of it will cancel. So it should help mitigate some of the null, which got me thinking 2 things. One, what I could do is spin the room round and have the speakers here firing down the room, so that 95 Hertz goes out the window and doesn't get reflected back. Obviously, there's a bit of the sidewalls it would come back on, but a lot of it would go out the window. From this point of view, the null this would be the best solution for the null. However, as you can see, because of the chimney stack, the wall behind the speakers wouldn't be even, and then we're going to be entertaining a whole bunch of other SBIR interference, sound barrier interference issues with the different distances from the walls, meaning each speaker is going to measure very differently in the listening position as a result of that. And I figured that was going to be more of a cluster F than having it down there. So I decided not to do that. I may still test that. Subscribe and watch this space if you want to see that. Leave a comment if you'd like to see that. So opening the window, I figure the sound's still going to go down the room, bounce back, but a lot of it's going to go out the window, so it's not going to then bounce back again. So this should help mitigate the null. And as we can see here, the null is now down to 7 decibels, which is about 1 dB more than I think is acceptable. I was aiming to get all of this within 6 dB plus or minus before room correction software, which even Sound ID from Sonarworks can handle plus or minus 6 decibels. Trinoff can definitely walk all over that, and Arc as well. Arc Studio is very good. I've got a video reviewing all the room correction softwares available, not including Dirac, but including the Neumann MA1 software. I'll put that link in the description below as well. That's a good comparison. So what do we see? Well, the null that I'm worried about at 95 is a lot better. The mid-range is okay. There's this weird dip in the top end, and this, again, still this massive boost of almost 10 dB at about 14 kilohertz. Not too worried about that because we can EQ that out. Then it occurred to me, well, I've got a desk here in front of me, and I was measuring all this with nothing in the desk. When I fill the desk with rack gear, it's effectively going to create a flat surface, which is going to reflect frequencies. Desk reflection's always a problem. Admittedly, there's going to be lots of little twiddly knobs and things to disperse some of it, but ultimately, it's largely going to be a flat surface. So I've got a plyboard, piece of plyboard, put it over the desk to act as my filled out desk, acting as a reflective surface. With the board on the desk, the null is actually a little bit better. And now we're at a point where this is only 5 decibels at 1/6 smoothing. That's important. This is good. But we've got all this mid-range stuff. Obviously, we're reflecting all the low mids at me at the listening position, and that's building up. But the top end is reduced, but now there's a massive dip. Interesting. Then I bought in various different combinations and played around with the acoustic treatment again. Different treatment in different places, but ultimately, what I settled on was this. And you might think, oh, it's not perfect. However, we've not got the null at the top end. There is a bit of a null at 600 hertz, and the null at 94 hertz is actually a little bit worse. But there's a reason I've settled on this for now. When we start looking at the decay time, this is when things get interesting. So with the window plugged and no acoustic treatment, it was very resonant, and this was a decay time. Absolute disaster. There was no intelligibility. With the speakers, that would have resulted in a poor sounding, weak sounding phantom center, very murky and obscure and ill-defined stereo imaging, and it wouldn't have been workable. That was with the speakers, and it's even in the optimal speaker position. So the main issue here is we've got this huge resonance at 44 hertz. With the first reflection points, the whole room gets better. Look how much that goes down. Same listening position, microphone in the same measuring position. First reflection points, so sidewalls, ceiling, and 2 bass panels at the back. Huge improvement. My goal here is to get all of this below 200 milliseconds. But there's still a bit of stuff going on in the low mids and this huge tail. With all the panels, which is basically how I have it now, the decay time is pretty much under 200 milliseconds all the way across. And this decay time is down to half a second. It sounds quite a lot when you say that. So what's causing this decay? I don't think this is a room issue. I think this is a building issue. I think the building is naturally resonating at 44 hertz. Above me, there is an empty cavity. There is a whole loft space above me that for some reason nobody has built into and nobody has access to. That space goes all the way along the top of the flat, which is actually roughly the same wavelength as 44 hertz. There's, it goes over the room next to me, over the rooms at the back. So there's quite a bit of space up there. That, I think, is causing this problem because whatever I did in the room didn't mitigate this. Now, there's several ways I can get around this. One is I could try only having the speakers go from, say, 50 hertz. And I did that, and this was the result. Besides this little flutter here, which is totally random, there is no decay, sustained decay at 45 hertz. Obviously, I've not put any of it into the room, so there's nothing for that to resonate with. And the frequency response is manageable. But I do want that low-end information in the room. So the best I've got it is basically this with the decay time as low as possible. So there was a measurement where the null measured better, and that was with the board on the desk and a slightly different configuration of the bass trapping and the acoustic paneling, but the decay time wasn't good enough in the low mids, and this is ultimately where optimizing a room is a balance and a compromise between frequency response and decay time. An improved decay time is going to improve your phantom center between the speakers and the accuracy of your stereo imaging. This is not to say you want a perfectly dead room, because that can sound boring. My last room was dead. Apparently there's no such thing as too dead, but it was quite dry. It kind of felt like it sucked the life out of music and mixers, so I wasn't a fan of that being too dead. But in the low mids and the low end, this is where you particularly want a low decay time. So although the frequency response was better here, the decay time is compromised. So I've basically settled on this decay time, obviously ignoring 45 hertz, and this frequency response at 1/6 smoothing. Now, if I lower this to 1/3, we're not in a bad place. Okay, we've still got a 5 dB null there, and there's a 4 dB null there, and there's a big peak in the top end. I have a plan for that, but the low mids, largely desk reflection related. Two things may change that, or help with that. One, I need to try the Amphion 218s, because their MTM format The nature of those speakers narrows the dispersion on the horizontal plane. That made a big difference in my old room and mitigated some of the desk reflections, and those speakers measured better. So I'm kind of hoping that's going to happen here. I need to audition different speakers. That'll be another part of the series. Regards with the top end, I think all that is basically covering more surface area. I think at the moment I have maybe 50% of the room covered, so there's definitely potential to cover more of the room with more absorbing and high-end absorbing material. I'm not going to go as far as using the F word, foam, but in my old studio, it did help. There is a use for it in the higher frequencies. Low end, below 1000 hertz, foam's doing nothing. But in the higher frequencies, it might help, but it also looks crap. So I'm probably not going to do that. That's going to be visible on camera. So if I do it, basically none of you will ever know. But if this all of a sudden disappears, you'll know I've done something to mitigate this top end. Now, some people are going to be like, why aren't we looking at the waterfall charts? Well, that's the waterfall chart as it looks at the moment. I think they're hideous to look at. Obviously, you've got your peaks in terms of frequency, and you've got your decay time at every frequency. It's a 3D model. I just don't like how these look. My brain works a lot better dealing in frequency and dealing in decay times. These to me are the most important too. If you like the waterfall, great. Use it if that's beneficial to you. So moving on from here, there are a couple of options regarding the Null. One is trying subwoofers, because a subwoofer placed in a different position to a speaker will activate a different frequency in the room at a different time, which may mitigate this Null. 2 subwoofers is likely to be the solution, but I only have 1. So I'm going to try that in another video, and if I can get hold of another subwoofer, I will try that as well. However, being in a flat on the first floor with a cavity below and above, I'm hesitant to put all that low end in the room, especially when I know I have a problem at 44 hertz. But if it helps with the Null, I'm going to try it. The second option is tuned membrane bass traps, which GIK offer, and you can specifically get them, I think, at 40, 70 and 100 hertz. So I would get the 100 ones, being closest to 94. But by all accounts, I'm going to need to cover this whole back wall with them. I reckon I would need 8, assuming that each one does about 2 decibels of attenuation, which is pretty much what I gathered these did in my old studio. That's just a guess. I don't know. If you know the answer to that, leave your comments. I can probably chat GPT it as well. So I would, to get, you know, an 8 dB Null, well, so maybe I'm going to need 4 of them, but that's still best part of £1,000, which I don't want to spend because I'm trying to do this on a budget. The third option is getting a set of cardioid array speakers, which are basically your key 3s or your Dutch and Dutch 8Cs, maybe the 6Cs. But then we're talking thousands and thousands of pounds. And I have speakers. I really don't want to have to sell all those and buy another set of speakers. I may try a set in the room if I can be bothered. But again, this is not about spending money. Even if I could recoup all that money from the other speaker sales, I'm still going to have to put in some money, and I don't want to do that. Plus, I love the Amphions, and I stand by how good they are. Whatever I would do, I would keep a set of Amphions because I just think they're wonderful speakers. The fourth option is, of course, relying on room correction. You know, with a Null of 5 dB, Trinnov can handle that, but it's still, to do that, it's still got to do some phase alignment trickery at that frequency, and that always comes at a cost somewhere else, whether it be the intelligibility or the accuracy of that. You can't just EQ or phase align, remove a Null. It's not that simple. Trinnov does a wonderful job at mitigating all these things, but there's always something that then sounds slightly weird elsewhere. Now, one more thing to point out is with this huge resonance at 44 hertz, what's interesting is the EQ boost we have at 120 to 127 is the third harmonic of that resonance, and there's also this, you know, peak at the octave above it, about nearly about 80, there or thereabouts. So something at 40 is then reoccurring at the octave and the third harmonic of that frequency. Now, 120 I can EQ out, and I can try and treat it as much as I can. And as you can see here, I've got the decay time to about 240 milliseconds at 120 hertz. I think that's tolerable. And when I get more stuff in from the studio, there'll be more dispersion, there'll be more absorption, more stuff will just help mitigate this. So what we're going to do is revisit this in a few videos time when I've experimented with subwoofers and see if they can mitigate this null at 95, and then brought the rest of the equipment from the other studio, set it all up, and I've settled on positioning for the acoustic panels. We'll remeasure, and at the last video of the series I'll give you a full breakdown of the exact frequency response I've ended up with and without Trinov. And also a reminder, I'll give you the full budget that I've spent on this studio, because I'm pretty sure it's going to be about double what I initially thought it was going to be, depending on what type of AC unit I get. Talking of AC, in video 3 I suggested there was maybe a project failure point of this, which was getting air in and out of the room. Unplugging the window is a big part of solving that issue. A, I'm getting the natural daylight back, which I really like, but kind of why I wanted to come in this room. B, I can open the windows. So if I'm mixing on speakers, I close the windows, I close the door, seal all the air in. I'm gonna get a portable air conditioning unit that can cool before I do that with the door open, or even send the extractor pipe, as someone suggested in the comments, up through the chimney stack. There's a vent up there. And I was thinking they were saying that could be the in-out extractor, but I'm not going to suck air into here from the chimney. But pumping air out of that is potentially the solution. Air will naturally be drafted in. I can't seal everything, so I can definitely get a through flow of air doing that. But I'm going to have a pipe that goes up there. I don't know how to hide that. That's going to look crap. That's an ongoing thought process. Worst case, I get a portable AC unit, put it in the door. When the door's open, I cool the room, and when I need to mix on speakers, I do it for short bursts, let the room heat up, which will also change the acoustics. It's not ideal, but it's a compromise. Everything about this is a compromise. So that's where we're at. Thanks for watching. I hope you found that interesting. Leave your comments below and I'll try and get back to as many as I can. Subscribe for the next part of this series, which is going to be hopefully testing how subwoofers can mitigate this null. I'm going to start off with one, the PSI sub I have, and maybe figure out getting another sub. I think that's going to be an interesting video, because that's, again, going to be a huge compromise between practicality and actual effectiveness. It's been emotional. I've been Ed Thorne. Thanks for watching. Be kind to yourself and other people. See you on the next one.